My name is Meagan Thompson, and I'm a clinical mental health counseling intern at the Refuge Center for Counseling. Today, I'd like to speak with you about the subject of resilience. What is resilience? Is resilience something I'm born with, or is it something that I need to work towards? What does the Bible have to say about resilience? Today, I'd like to explore these areas with you and see if we can't gain a greater understanding of it. So to start with, there are many different ways to define resilience. One of the most popular is the ability to adapt well and bounce back in times of stress. Now, this doesn't mean that you don't experience stress or that you don't experience pain or sadness or any common life difficulties. What this means is that in the face of such difficulties, you can recover. You can take a moment to identify your needs and do your best to meet your needs to help you bounce back from what life has thrown at you. Now, a common misconception about resilience is that it is something you have or do not have. But the reality is, resilience can occur on a continuum. You might be more resilient at work, for example, than you might be at home. Or perhaps you might be more resilient at school than you are at work. Really, in different life domains, we can have differing levels of resilience. So it's best to consider resilience as occurring on a continuum rather than in more black and white definition. So we now have the understanding that resilience can occur more on a continuum rather than being something you have or do not have. With this too, we also want to acknowledge that resilience is something that builds on our personal strengths. And so the process of cultivating, developing, or even maintaining resilience is really a personal process. What works for me may not work for you. For example, if I am the creative type person and one of my safeguards for maintaining resiliency is to exercise that regularly through painting, but someone who is not the creative type person tries to paint and it just increases their anxiety and their stress, then that obviously is not going to work for them in regard to helping to cultivate resilience. Remember, resilience is something that will help us bounce back from stress and anxiety. So it is very important to understand that resilience is a personal thing, and more so, developing resilience is a very personal process. It is going to look different for everybody because it builds on our strengths as well as the resources that are existing or the resources that we are cultivating. And it's also helpful to remember too with this personal element of resilience that we all react differently to stress and anxiety and all the big and little traumas of life, which further emphasizes the personal element of resilience. Two people can experience the same event and react completely different. And many studies have shown that even twins that are raised in the same environment, that share the same DNA, they respond differently to the same situation because of their differences in personalities. Of course, this personal element of resilience, as well as the differences in how each individual responds to the same or similar situations, is not by accident. From the Christian faith perspective, the Bible tells us that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And if that's the case, then how could we possibly assume that the way that we respond to life circumstances has any less thought or care put into it? Now, where I'm going with this is that since the process of developing resilience is such a personal process, and since it pulls from our innate strengths, it would stand to reason that it would then yield certain characteristics that complements those strengths. And these characteristics of resilience, research has identified there are many common characteristics, and many of these characteristics are supported in the Bible. Take, for example, recognition of limits of control, which is a characteristic that has been found to be common in more resilient people. Now, when I think about recognizing limits of control, I am drawn to the book of Ecclesiastes, specifically in chapter 3, in those opening verses where the writer of Ecclesiastes is discussing the time and the season for various things. You know, there's a time for the sun to rise and a time for the sun to set, a time to weep and a time to celebrate. The writer of Ecclesiastes does an eloquent job of recognizing and describing the many different seasons of life. And the reason this is so relevant is because the writer of Ecclesiastes was actually very frustrated with injustice. And he was also very frustrated with the inability of wisdom to provide understanding for unforeseen tomorrows. So the writer of Ecclesiastes is writing from a place of frustration that he has little control in various different domains of life. And recognizing limits of control actually ties in nicely with the element of faith, which was another characteristic that was commonly found in more resilient people over the course of many different studies. Now, on the subject of faith, insofar as that the way it ties into limits of control, I am reminded strongly of the opening verses of Hebrews 11, specifically the definition of faith, which is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things unseen. So a resilient person can identify, okay, I have no control in this domain, but I can respond in a manner where I do control and hope that things will turn out. Now, this sounds really great in theory, but incredibly difficult to apply in real life. If you take that statement on its own, it's almost like, well, now hang on a second. What do I do with all these negative emotions that I feel when things don't turn out the way that I expected them to, or the way that I had hoped for them to? You know, am I supposed to just ignore all these negative emotions that I have? Well, no. Resilient people don't ignore their negative affect. Rather, what research has found is that resilient people have a greater tolerance for it. So they don't deny the fact that they feel their negative emotions when, you know, life happens, but rather they acknowledge that that's what they're feeling. They sit with that for a minute, and then they learn how to cope with it well. And if there is ever a model for tolerance of negative affect, the first one that comes to mind would definitely be the story of Job. Oh, bless Job. What comes to mind most strongly in the story of Job is chapter 1, verses 13 through 22, where we have learned all that has happened to Job. Like back to back to back, the messengers are coming and they're carrying awful, terrible news. And in his distraught, Job tears his clothes and he's calling out to God. And he says, the Lord has given and the Lord has taken away. But he doesn't curse the name of God. In fact, verse 22 of chapter 1 says, he did not sin. Despite all the brokenheartedness and mixed negative emotions Job must have been feeling in that moment, he found a way to cope with it well. And that's what resilient people do. Now, later on in the story of Job, we see another characteristic that has been commonly found in resilient people, which is the willingness to engage in the support of others. In the story of Job, we know that Job had 3 friends that came to visit him in his time of despair, and we saw many chapters of a back and forth between Job and his 3 friends. Now, engaging the support of others is something that is cemented deeply in research and various different studies. Even going back to looking into attachment theories, we see that it is a very basic and innate drive for us to engage the support of others when we're in need. And that is something that resilient people are more readily adept to do. They can recognize the need for reaching out to support in their supportive influences in their lives, and they are willing to take that step. They are willing to say, hey, I need help. I thought of you. Can you support me? And in that, there is a certain measure of humility and strength that comes with being able to engage the support of others, which actually leads into the strengthening effects of stress. We see in 2 Corinthians, I want to say chapter 4, verses 8 through 9, where Paul describes to us how perseverance can lead to strength. And in that, and I know he's speaking about perseverance, but in that, given everything that we've already discussed, we can see how that also translates into resilience. Now, it's just occurred to me that I neglected to differentiate resilience from perseverance. So let me take a moment real quick to do that. Perseverance, which is very often and blatantly discussed in the Bible, is persistence in the face of difficulties. Despite the difficulty of something, we are not going to give up in whatever it is we're achieving to do in that situation. Whereas resilience is the ability to bounce back from a difficult situation. I liken it to tackling something head on versus recovering from having tackled something head on. And so we can see how when Paul discusses in 2 Corinthians 4 verses 8 through 9, how he discusses the strengthening effects of stress and how it goes hand in hand. Perseverance and resilience can go hand in hand. And so it translates very well. His discussion of perseverance translates quite well to resilience, because when you are reaping from the strengthening effects of stress, when you are engaging in the support of others to help meet your needs, when you are recognizing your limits of control, and you are not permitting your faith to get shaken, or maybe if you are not very much faith oriented, but values driven, belief driven, you're not letting your values and your beliefs get shaken from the difficulties that you're surviving in life. And so it becomes clear then, examining these common characteristics of resilient people and examining how the Bible supports these common characteristics, that there are certain main factors that contribute to resilience. And in a nutshell, these main factors can be listed off as a good support system, feeding into the good support system, so maintaining those positive relationships in your life, as well as cultivating and maintaining a positive attitude, which is where we see that accepting limits of control and meeting your needs, acknowledging that you can bounce back from this, you just may need a little help. And in that examination as well, we can see that developing resilience could be likened to putting into a bank. So adding money into your savings account. It can be considered investing. That's the word I'm looking for. It can be considered an investment into your future self, especially with regard to social engagement and reaching out for the support of others. Developing resiliency helps you maintain caring and supportive relationships because it puts you in a more easygoing and pleasant disposition that people are drawn to. And so now that we have examined what resilience is and the common traits associated with resilience, and how the Bible supports those traits, I would like to discuss with you various different ways you can better cultivate your resilience. There are lots of different approaches because as created beings, we are very dynamic. There are lots of different elements. There's the spiritual and the mental and the physical and emotional. We are complicated beings. However, a simple list, I've got 6 points here to bring to your attention, and I will try to make it concise because I know I'm running out of time with you wonderful people. Number 1 is compassion. Self-compassion, actually. Be kind to yourself. Allow yourself to ease up on your expectations of what should and shouldn't be in life, and give yourself permission to gain your presence back. On that same note, allowing yourself to feel and express your emotions is very important. Again, going back to that tolerance of negative affect, if you're feeling angry or sad or hurt, it is perfectly acceptable to feel those emotions, and even possible to do so without sinning. Attend to the physical element. So take a walk, get some exercise. Movement can actually increase our energy level and release endorphins to help us physically feel good. And then the spiritual aspect. Meditate, pray, sing worship, go dance in the mountains, do whatever it is that helps you connect to God or your higher power, and find that peace with that spiritual element that's so important to you. Again, tending to the physical aspect is taking deep breaths. You could be quite surprised at the impact of breathing on our central nervous system. A simple 2-minute meditation of deep breathing can make you feel ready to take the deepest nap of your life. I mean, if you haven't tried it yet, I strongly encourage you to begin practicing deep breathing exercises. And then the last thing on my list here is to take some intentional actions, bringing the element of intentionality, again, recognizing our limits of control and then responding in a way that we know we can control. So bringing the element of intentionality, especially when we're feeling overwhelmed, can help us move forward with a sense of accomplishment. If you are trying to better cultivate or develop your resilience, then one tool that might be very helpful for you is something called the Resilience Building Plan Worksheet. You can Google it and find it for free. It's broken up into 8 sections and actually does attend to many of the different areas that we have already discussed, such as calming the body, calming the mind through breathing exercises, or recognizing that you are stressed out and attending to the physical elements of that. Again, you could just type in to Google Resilience Building Plan Worksheet, and it will help you better organize your needs and set you on your way to bringing some intentionality in developing your resilience.